Hello panelists, I bring you greetings from Sierra Leone in West Africa. My name is Yatta Kanu, Professor Yatta Kanu, and I am the Chief Education Officer in the Ministry of Basic and Senior Secondary Education, MBSSE for short. And the Chief Education Officer simply means the professional head as well as the technical head of the ministry. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in this panel discussion.
So I go ahead and ask a question. What are your ministry's aim of focus, approach, and priorities regarding girls' education?
Those of us who are interested in the education of girls in Sierra Leone are very familiar with the literature, which has been mainly negative in terms of girls' marginalization or being shut out of school in Sierra Leone. So our major focus right now is to bring girls back into the school system, to retain them as far as graduation is concerned. And the government, represented by the Ministry of Basic and Senior Secondary Education, is doing a number of things to make sure that this happens. First of all, the country has introduced the Free Quality School Education program. Now, what this does is to lessen the burden of schooling on parents. So, for example, the government pays school fees, the government supplies teaching and learning materials, the government makes sure that sports equipment are all provided, the government pays trained and qualified teachers. This is not enough, but there is a whole bunch of things that government is doing to make sure that kids access education. So that has been one major assisting factor, the political will to be able to do this, to bring girls back into the school system. And we have also banned the previous policy that prevented pregnant girls, for example, from coming back to school. As soon as it was noticed that you were pregnant, they were going to ask you to leave the school system. As a result of that kind of marginalization and as a result of the ruling of the ECOWAS court, this particular government, the present government, removed that ban. And now girls who are pregnant and girls who have given birth and they have decided to come back to school, they are all allowed back into the school system. We have put a number of forward-looking policies in place that have been targeting girls, such as our national policy on radical inclusion in schools, which focuses on 4 marginalized groups, girls especially, including pregnant girls, children with disabilities, children living in rural remote areas, and children living in poverty. So these are the 4 groups that we have targeted in the national policy on radical inclusion in schools. And maybe we should not refer to them as marginalized because their numbers are quite substantial. A very large number of children in Sierra Leone belong to these 4 categories. So we have introduced the radical inclusion policy, and we have made sure that we did not only develop a policy that can rest on the shelves, we made sure that the policy is accompanied by a very solid implementation plan. How do we actually implement this policy? We came up with ways of financing this policy, and then we made sure that we conducted a baseline study that will tell us what is happening on the ground right now in terms of radical inclusion, in terms of girls' education, children with disabilities, So that is one way. We are also developing a policy called Comprehensive School Safety Policy. And that is basically focusing on girls' education as well, because Sierra Leone, like in many other African countries, suffers a lot from school-based gender violence. And so that policy is going to make sure that school violence is addressed in a very radical way. And we have introduced things like sexual violence against children in school, against girls and children in general in school, is punished either by expelling the teachers or the perpetrators who engage in that kind of thing. And we are also making sure that we have abolished corporal punishment in school, because that is another form of school-based violence that is preventing our girls from staying in school. So we have abolished corporal punishment. In fact, we have just completed the training of the school administrators, school superintendents, and teachers. Everybody pertaining to the school or relating to the school has been trained on a manual that I myself developed on the abolition of corporal punishment and introducing alternative, positive disciplinary measures in schools. So there is a lot that we are doing in order to make sure that our girls stay in school to completion.
In your experience, what are examples of strong linkages between stakeholder groups that you've seen?
Well, what comes to mind easily is the work that we did when we were developing the radical inclusion policy. We worked with an organization called Purposeful, which had actually developed a draft for girls' education before I took over as Chief Education Officer. And then we worked with Site Savers, which had also developed a draft called Inclusive Education that was focusing on students with disabilities. What we did when we came, the minister and myself, was to look at these two drafts and make the decision that these two groups were not the only marginalized groups. So what we did our research. We scoured documents on marginalization in education, and we found out that girls living in rural remote areas, underserved areas, were also marginalized in the sense that they were not getting teachers, they were not getting all of the teaching and learning materials that they were entitled to, and they were dropping out of school. And then, of course, children living in poverty. So that's how we came about the 4 groups that we focus on in the radical inclusion policy. It's a work in collaboration. A whole bunch of ministries and departments and agencies came together to put that policy, although it was led and driven by the Ministry of Basic and Senior Secondary Education. Again, FCDO, thank you very much. I keep referring to FCDO because they are really doing a tremendous amount of work in this area since they started working on the Girls' Education Challenge in Sierra Leone. The FCDO has done a lot of work in that area. So they sponsored the development of the implementation plan for that policy. And then they also funded the baseline study that informed us about what is already happening on the ground. And then we had a whole bunch of other line ministries, as well as international organizations such as Save the Children and Street Child. They all came together and we developed the implementation plan as well as the facilitation of the implementation of the radical inclusion policy. So that is really what comes to mind immediately. But the fact that they are all working in this one important area of girls' education, that is also an example of collaboration, and we are working with them. Those who are not working with us, because you do have international non-government organizations who prefer to work on their own, but we have managed to bring almost all of them into the fold and under the supervision of the ministry, so that they are working in line with our goals and aspirations for girls' education in Sierra Leone. So we have been working with quite a number of them.
Why and how are linkages not working as well as they could?
Linkages are not working as well as they could. You are correct, because I think my role as the Chief Education Officer in this ministry is to do more to bring all of these various organizations who are all working towards the same goal of girls' education, improve girls' education. They are all working in the same area of focus. However, they are doing different things. So what I do as the Chief Education Officer is to try to create a link between them all, bringing the various dimensions of what they do. So for example, you will see people who are focusing on the hygiene, the menstrual hygiene kits I mentioned. You have people who are focusing on the theoretical part of the work, and others who are focusing on the practical part of the work on the ground. You have those who are focusing on providing financial assistance to the parents of these girls so that they are not out there selling goods for their parents to bring in an income, but rather the supplementary financial support that these organizations give. That support is what helps the parents financially, and that is what allows these girls, the parents, to send these girls back to school. So there is a whole bunch of diverse approaches, that people are using. My role as the Chief Education Officer is to work hard to create linkages between them so that they will see the commonalities. That will definitely that will reduce wastage of resources, because I have found out that, for example, the ministry's work, the work that the ministry is doing, is being replicated by some of the work that the IDRC, the IRC, the International Rescue Committee, is doing. And so they are running into each other in the various districts. That will not happen if these two parties knew what the other was doing. So I have brought the two parties together so that that kind of wastage is minimized. So maybe I ought to do more to create that link, because it really becomes very useful to us, and that is, if you know what the other is doing, you are not rivals. You are all working towards the same goals. If one group is doing this, you can focus on something else. So that is one benefit of creating linkages, and I can do more of that by making them aware of each other's work so that there is no replications in what it is that they are doing.
What is a practical and concrete way to address this?
The problem of linkages?
Yes.
Yeah, I think I have already alluded a little bit to the method that I can use, and I have put the onus on us as a ministry to make sure that we bring them together more. Lately, the partners are doing something called learning events. Learning events means, and I've gone to about 3 of them. Learning events is where they showcase the work that they are doing. So they bring together a group of panelists, they bring together the girls whom they are helping, they share the work that they are doing. And so instead of just having one person doing this or one organization doing this, I have decided that whenever a learning event is happening, I should be able to invite the other partners who are working in girls' education. So when you bring them together in that way and they learn about what the other is doing, we can minimize wastage, as I said, we can minimize the replication, and they can learn from each other, and that learning can strengthen the work that they are doing. So that is one way in which I am envisioning bringing them all together, creating this kind of linkage among the partners who are working in the area of girls' education. Thank you.